Very quickly, I want to introduce you to Amit. Amit is a director of product at Facebook, where he leads product for newsfeed. And previously, he was a group product manager at Google, where he was heading the Google's real-time communications that includes products like Google Hangout and Google Voice. And Amit is also a passionate mentor. So he loves mentoring upcoming product managers. In fact, he's a product management coach at Berkeley Haas, and he's also a product management coach at this very platform, Mentor Me Good, where he focuses on career strategy discussions. So, welcome, Amit. So glad to have you here. How's it going?
It's great to do this virtually. I'm excited to see questions from all of you. Happy Saturday to everyone. Thanks for joining.
Tell us about your career journey and how it started, how you got into product. I think there's a startup somewhere in there. So, yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in India and I did my undergrad in Pune. I'm from Pune. It's great to see a lot of people from back home joining in. I came to the US to study. I did my master's in computer science, and my first job straight out of school was at Microsoft. That's how I ended up moving to Seattle and the West Coast. Um, I actually started as a developer. My first couple of years, I was a software engineer, and then I moved to what Microsoft used to call program management, which was very similar to what product management is, but not quite the same. And I can cover the distinction later. I did that. I left to do a startup. I had a great run at Microsoft, but I wanted to do something of my own, get in early. So I joined a startup which was doing building a monetization platform for games. And so I worked there, and as luck would have it, we uh, ended up being acquired by Google. And so I moved to Google. I spent 8 years at Google, primarily building 0 to 1 products in the communication space. And so, some of them worked well and are still going strong. Some of them didn't. So I have learnings from both what to do and what not to do. And after Google, I moved to Facebook to work on newsfeed. Feed is the is what you see when you open the Facebook app. It's very central to how people connect. So I lead that product team, and it's been exciting. That's kind of my journey so far.
When you look at products today, like Zoom and Clubhouse or even Google Meet, and the way they have evolved today, do you have any learnings when you reflect back at your time at Google Hangout? Do you remember how your team thought about product market fit at that time? And so I particularly am interested in getting your take on how product teams should think about product market fit.
It's a great question. So, um, to me, I think product market fit really, the question before that is really being clear about what problem you're solving, what your use case is, um, and how you're going to measure product market fit. Because and I think there's frameworks to look at how you define product market fit, how you look at retention and J curves. I'm not going to go into all that, because I think there's a lot of literature about that. But I think what is important is um, you have a fit if you see, consumers actually using your product um, on a frequent basis for the problem that you intend them to solve. And I think that's kind of the litmus test. Google Hangouts, which is now Meet, and I'm not at Google anymore, but I was there through that journey. I would say has gone through a similar evolution. Um, it started out, I don't know how many of you remember, but Hangout started out as a product that was part of Google's social network, Google Plus. And a lot of focus in the early days was really about this use case of serendipity, where people can just, find others hanging out and you jump in and you make those connections. Very similar to what House Party, if you've played with that app, tried to do. But what you're seeing now with Google Meet, and you mentioned Zoom, um, it's evolved to be a very focused productivity tool, right? How do you get work done? How do you bring people together? How do you collaborate? It's integrated with the calendar and on all of those things. And it's doing pretty successfully. Now, the reason I am saying this is it is actually in some ways the same product in terms of capabilities, right? It's got video feeds, it's got number of participants, mute and mute. There's a skeptical way to look at, which is, hey, video conferencing hasn't really gone through as much evolution as one would imagine. Um, but I think the product is has the same capabilities, but it's a lot more focused on what problem it's trying to solve, which is, how are people collaborating, getting work done. And I think having that kind of focus is a prerequisite before you start to measure product market fit, right? And so I think that's kind of how I think about how, as product managers, you should be thinking about whether your product is serving a need or not. That's kind of the more important conceptual question than before you get lost into numbers and trying to optimize funnels and stuff.
Let's say you have a strong hypothesis about your product market fit, and now you're getting into the next stage where you're actually going to create the product. And I think that's where one of the most challenging aspect of for a product manager comes, which is to make those tricky trade-off decisions. For example, you could have a trade-off between building more features for a new customer segment, or improving the features for your existing customer base. Or it could also mean a trade-off between a tech design that favors speed to market versus something for a long-term extensibility. And I think in all of these trade-off like realm of trade-off, one that stands out to me is the UX, the trade-off that involves UX, because for other things, they are kind of behind the wall. The tech design and the roadmap, your customers are not going to see it, but your user experience is out there, so the customer is going to experience it, which makes it a little more challenging. And then in context of like Facebook newsfeed, there is this trade-off between showing ads versus showing user-generated content. And so my question to you, Amit, is how do you think about trade-offs in general, and then the ones that involve user experience? So perhaps you could use a newsfeed as an example, or any other product that you like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Trade-offs, right? That's kind of one of the things as PMs or aspiring PMs here, you would have to deal with. Um, and I wish I could tell you this like a standard playbook. Sometimes this is the art part of product management comes in because it's not as pure as engineering. The output is what it is, and you have to look at your code. But there's okay. So when it comes to trade-offs, I think there's a few kind of principles. It's important for us to um, always remember, and I'll give you some concrete examples since you asked about newsfeed. Um, I mean, I think in terms of principles, um, you know, one of the product philosophies I have about building something new is less is more. Um, and this is something that I have both developed and I adhere to based on just the experience that I've had building products and also looking at what successful products have done right in the early stages. I think I had a post about this in LinkedIn where I talked about if you look at the first version of iPhone, um, the very first iPhone that Steve Jobs introduced actually did not have an app store. It was only tied to Verizon here in the US as a carrier, like so it was locked. Um, it had so many limitations that when you look back, you're like, oh, how did they even launch this product? But the reason they launched, and the reason that it succeeded was it was about just nailing what they set out to do. And there's many examples of products like that, which was all about the touch interface, how they brought kind of internet navigation and telephony together. So being clear about what is the minimal things you need to solve and being clear about what that problem you're solving or what innovation you're introducing, getting that right, um, is a kind of a principle in product development that you should always hold dear. There'll always be tendency to do a lot more because you'll have all these pressures from within your company. Sometimes customers will ask you for a bunch of things to just add more and more stuff into your product without nailing that core. So that's my like a principled approach in trade-off. and how you do trade-offs. And there's many examples. If you look at early version of Gmail, it didn't have like so many things. Delete button wasn't there. All they nailed was performance and unlimited storage. And so I think that's kind of the philosophy you should have. Now, your question is less about a 0 to 1 product. It's about newsfeed, which operates at a massive scale. And how do you think about trade-offs there? And look, the question around ads versus content is actually less of a trade-off that I have to worry about, because over the years we've developed very clear um, rules, so to speak, on how many ads we can serve, what the gaps between ads should be, and and this is based on both what is effective for advertisers, but more importantly, what is the right balance for people using the service, people using the feed. You don't want every other post to be ad. So we have strict like rules, policies, guidelines around that. So it's not a trade-off I or the team have to think about day to day. Sometimes we get it wrong based on, let's say, how much inventory you have, but we try and go fix those things. I think the biggest trade-off in my role that I have to deal with is, if you think about feed as a user, what you get is a set of stories, what we call content, right? Posts, set of posts and stories that we think are most relevant to you. And every time we introduce something new, a new format, a new feature, a new type of service, I'll give you an example, which is Reels, which is our short form video product. And we launched it in India last year. And when we show that in feed, by its very nature, when you show something new, it's displacing something that was more valuable, right? And we don't know how valuable this new thing is going to be you as a person. Maybe you're kind of person who loves short form videos and find it very entertaining. Maybe you don't care for those and you really want to connect with your friends, see their updates, and get off your session. Those are the kind of trade-offs that are more challenging, because you want to also give some time for the new type of product to build up and show its value and experiment and iterate. At the same time, I have to trade it off against something that would have taken its place. So those are kind of trade-offs that at a scaled product I have to deal with, which is, I think, a different flavor of challenge than what some of the classical should I build this feature or not kind of trade-offs. So trade-offs exist everywhere. I think being clear about goals, your users, the principles, um, can build your framework. It won't give you ready-made answers, and something just you have to build intuition around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For someone who is looking to break into product, or who wants to become an exceptional product manager, what advice do you have?
What advice do I have? Let's see. I think this. I would actually even take those questions separately. I think there's a breaking into product management, which is, I think, slightly different, and then there's how to be an exceptional product manager. So let me give you kind of my sense, and this is probably a longer conversation, but I'll try to be brief and give you some like high level thoughts. If people have more questions, we can go dig in. Look, breaking into product management, I know is a bit challenging in a sense that for them, there are roles that you can start straight out of graduation, straight out of college, school, which are early. Those roles are not as common. There's a far and few in between. And some of the programs we talk about, like the RPM or APM program, at least at companies like Google and Facebook, um, they just don't have that many applicants that we can take. And so I think it is challenging. But I think that's one route, which is you've graduated, you apply to early product roles and start your journey, start by learning how to execute and then move up the value chain, so to speak, to then go figure out what you should build. Okay, so that's kind of breaking into product management. Now, if you are not fresh out of school and you're like mid stage, you have 5 to 6 years of experience, 7 years experience, I think it starts to get more challenging because now you have the experience. So you don't want to go to super early product roles, but you'll encounter this thing where companies would want uh, people with prior product manager experience. So you're kind of in like this catch 22. How do you get the experience till you become a product manager? So, I think what I have seen work well is if you're coming from another discipline, is to try and be a product manager in your current company. I think your odds of making that transition are a lot higher because you probably know the people, know the work, have more context, and figuring out how to switch there in my opinion, is easier than trying to both change your role from engineering to product or data to product and change your company. So it's a two-step, it's a bigger leap. So I always advise people, if there is a product role in your current company, try to do that and then move to another company. So that's about breaking into product management. How to be a great product manager? Oh my God, like we can spend hours on this. I don't think there's one answer. I think the thing that has personally stood out that has helped me is more than anything else. And there's a lot of skills, and I talk about this on LinkedIn every once in a while in post, but um, just being super curious. Um, and it sounds very cliche, but it's actually not. I think it's one of the most important things. And what I mean by that is, are you the type of person who installs a new app and uses it, and you have this almost curiosity about what is it in this product that's working, what's not working, why did they choose these kind of things, why is their brand a certain way, you know, and being curious and trying and just like trying to get better at both your understanding and intuition is like the most important thing. Like being hungry for just learning, um, because a lot of things stem from that. Your ability to absorb from more successful product people, better case studies, failures. When you're open and you're just always in that mindset that I want to be a better product person and how do I sharpen my skills. Personally, to me, that has been super helpful because that always like keeps me hungry to learn more. It's not just about product; it's about how I manage people. It's how about how I speak, how I write. I mean, all of those things. I'm just continuously trying to get better. So anyway, that would be my one advice.